Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Jonathan Fibus, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Stephen Hernandez, the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Information Assurance Services at the Education Department, Linus Baker, the Director of Cybersecurity at the Defense Logistics Agency, Kenneth McNeil, the Chief Information Officer at the National Guard Bureau, and Jeff Schwartz, the Vice President of North America Engineering at Checkpoint. Gentlemen, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
Before we get started, let me set just a little bit of context for our conversation today. It wouldn't be surprising if every morning Federal Chief Information Security Officers look in the mirror and remind themselves, I don't need any more cybersecurity tools. Just think of, you may remember this from the old Saturday Night Live character Stuart Smalley, a little self-affirmation never hurts. But the fact is, agencies have been buying tools and more tools to address cybersecurity challenges over the past 25 years, and even some vendors are saying enough is enough. The fact is, endpoint cyber tools are only as good as both the developer created them and how the agency has implemented them. CompTIA, the industry association, wrote in a blog post recently that by taking a platform approach to cybersecurity, organizations can start treating cyber tools as part of an integrated, functional, and scalable strategy. There is a growing call, whether through continuous diagnostics and mitigation or the CDM program, or through the move to a zero trust framework, agencies are starting to recognize why this platform concept is the future of cybersecurity. Now, to achieve this platform approach, agencies need to consider how they take full advantage of automation and orchestration so tools can talk to each other and provide real-time data to security experts. And this concept also gives agencies a leg up when it comes to managing cyber risk because they can focus on tools, people, and processes on the most important technology and mission assets. So what will it take to move agencies to this platform approach so they can potentially reduce the number of point products, better control and use funding, and ensure future budget requests are hitting the mark to address mission challenges? Steve, I'm going to turn to you to ask this first question, which goes to the approach to cybersecurity, and how are you focusing on outcomes versus just, hey, I met FISMA goals or I met CDM goals?
That's a great question, Jason, and I'm glad you mentioned FISMA as part of this because one of the things Congress recognized from the initial FISMA, meaning the Management Act, versus the FISMA 2014, which is the Modernization Act, is that there had to be this shift from compliance focus over to effectiveness and outcomes focused. And so in the FISMA of 2014, the Modernization Act, we see that there's this emphasis on making sure that when the Inspector General comes in and looks at how an agency's doing, they're looking at how effective is the program. And that's a huge paradigm shift because before that, it was, have you looked at 853, this massive catalog of like 700 or 800 control points, and have you met every single one? Let's go down that checklist. Now the IG is challenged with coming in and saying, hey, that's certainly part of the discussion, but is it effective? Because the challenge is, as everyone around this table will attest to, you can meet all 800 checkpoints and still have a breach. The compliance does not necessarily equal managed risk in an operational theater. And I think that the compliance is important. There are some bare minimum things that we all should be doing. I don't think anyone would argue it's a bad idea to apply encryption to sensitive information. That's just a fundamental, yeah, we all ought to be doing that. But there are other areas where we go beyond that compliance and say, not only do I need to encrypt that data, I should actually be tagging it, monitoring it, and I should be able to have non-repudiation of who's accessing it. And that's where we really get into that conversation of effectiveness. So I think the conversation is headed in the right direction. I really resonate with your discussion around tools because tools give us a sea of data to work with around compliance and around effectiveness. But we have to have the processes and the people in place to make sense of it. Otherwise, we've just automated a very complex compliance approach.
Just to add to Stephen's comments, what I would offer is I think that what we're seeing is that we're past the tipping point of compliance being a lowest common denominator of a boundary layer requirements to a position where we need to provide more modernization and a platform-based approach to providing more tangible security outcomes. And what that looks like is maintaining confidentiality, maintaining availability, and maintaining integrity of assets. But as institutions adopt more modern approaches to information sharing, collaboration with peer institutions and other third-party organizations, that securing an S3 bucket is very, very different than securing, something in a more traditional storage container inside a data center. And the controls to apply in these more modern approaches require a level of agility that the organization can both move quickly, but also be able to provide very thorough levels of security that, as the lowest common denominator, provide compliance adherence, but also provide tangibly better security outcomes.
Jeff, let me follow up with you on that, because I think, well, as you said, we're past the tipping point of compliance. What are you seeing when you talk to agency customers, when you talk to federal organizations? Are they getting that, or is you getting more of the, we have to lean toward compliance, but we're getting pulled toward effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies by agency and institution. I think that every organization is defined by their resources, their capabilities, and their priorities. And some organizations have prioritized in accordance with this changing world. And others, from a resource perspective, are severely constrained to be able to adequately reprioritize. So there is a cultural aspect to this, but at the end of the day, it's a function of these resources, priorities, and the capabilities of the in-house resources.
Linus, let me bring you in from DLA, because like you and Mr. McNeil, which I'll bring in next, you all have a culture issue that's different, because within the Defense Department, when something says do it, you hopefully it gets done fairly quickly. So maybe talk about DLA's perspective when it comes to your cybersecurity and how you guys are ensuring you're not moving toward just compliance, but really effectiveness.
No, and this is a very good topic, and one thing I will say about it in terms of the Department of Defense, compliance for years was the gold standard. It was the gold standard based on regulation, certain processes that were put in place through DISA and Cyber Command. So we would have command cyber readiness inspections, and they were all driven towards compliance with certain controls, certain requirements, certain mandates. One of the things we've seen over the last few years is we kind of have taken our eye off the ball in terms of the mission. Understanding that cyber operations, IT, it's a strategic asset, and we need to apply the same principles we apply to our logistics operations to this strategic asset. So what we've done recently is we've taken steps to identify what we consider key cyber terrain, or what we phrased in the department mission relevant cyber terrain. And we've tried to prioritize our remediation efforts, prioritize our detection and response efforts to those things that are crown jewels, to those things that could result in mission failure if compromised or exploited. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore the rest of the ecosystem in terms of the network and other utilities and services that are hosted on that network. However, when it comes to resourcing, we have to have an effective balance of where we accept risk, where we attempt to manage risk and remediate it. So I do think that shift has already occurred, but there was a time when compliance was indeed the gold standard. And I think we've made a significant change. Now, one of the issues we struggle with is really understanding the business enough from an IT perspective, because in many ways we've been siloed off. Right, you've got the IT guys, you perform that technical mission, and then we've got the logisticians or the functionals on the business side who really don't have a clear understanding of how their mission is being enabled and how their mission could be affected should those IT capabilities be degraded or become inoperable. So I think that mission assurance piece of things is also a tie to the outcome-based principle you discussed.
Just a quick follow-up. When you say you recently have taken steps to identify key cyber terrain, without going into obviously sensitive issues, how have you done that? Have you done a survey of your mission areas? Have you said what are your high-value assets that you can't live without? Give me a sense.
Yeah. So one of the things we did as an initial step was we worked with the logistics operations side of the house to have them basically decompose their mission. And so DLA manages 9 separate supply chains on behalf of the department. And that's a $40 billion department slice there that we're talking about. So we're essentially the Walmart for the Department of Defense. And so what we've done is every business process that supports all of those supply chains, we had our logistics operations group, we worked in tandem with them, decompose those missions all the way down to every mission essential function, to every task supporting element within that function. And we've been able to draw linkages to enabling IT capabilities that drive those business processes. So with that, we conducted an operational risk assessment when we derived that information from what we call the business process analysis. And we began to identify points of failure or choke points within those business processes and as it relates to IT. And so we've identified a certain list of what we've deemed no-fail capabilities that we have to have redundancy built into. We have to have contingency plans ready and tested so that in the event of a degradation or an outage, there's alternate business processes that can be kickstarted. So all of that's still a work in process. It's very good for not only the department to understand that, as we operate on a community of interest network called the DoD within the department. So they have to, before they execute defensive cyber measures, they have to understand what's important to us and what could be possibly affected. So it's not just a DLA issue. This is a department-wide effort, and there's a lot of cross-pollination and integration that goes into it.
Very good. Thanks for that explanation. Let me bring in Kenneth McNeil from the National Guard. Let's talk a little bit about your approach to cybersecurity as it relates to compliance versus outcomes.
So from a National Guard perspective, it's a little unique when we talk about compliance. So our domestic operations mission for the homeland, we have to support 54 states and territories in the District of Columbia. So, working across the DoD and also with interagency partners that the National Guard support every day brings the compliance piece into a unique perspective. From a DoD perspective, our Joint Force Headquarters in the states that are supporting local operations and supporting the local state, they're on the DoD, and compliance from that perspective is just like any other organization or agency within DoD. But from the interagency piece, we have to make sure as we are tied in and we're working with other agencies that need access to our data and vice versa, that we impose those capabilities in the compliance arena that is required. This synchronization is key for us, because most of our operations is synchronization for the homeland. You're coordinating for domestic operation equities with other agencies, non-DoD. So for us, having those tools that the DoD has from our Army Guard and Air National Guard, which are tied to their services, is the key for us to leverage as we move forward working with those organizations. So it's a little different. The big thing is, because of the homeland mission and working with those states and territories, the compliance piece we pay close attention to, because if an agency maybe is not in compliance or see it the way DoD, it brings us into a unique situation. So the tools that we use are cross-banded as far as making sure that we're meeting those requirements.
So there's two things that kind of occur to me as you walked us through this. Is you have a compliance issue because duty requires it, but you also have a outcome because your outcomes are dependent on, for instance, whether or not the DoD works or how to support different states in different areas. So would you discuss maybe just briefly the approach to cybersecurity you do take, whether or not it's, outside of this kind of discussion of compliance versus outcome based,
Right?
Because you can't support all 54 states and territories, or you can, but that adds a level of complexity that maybe a lot of other people don't have.
Okay. Yeah. From a DoD perspective in those states, like I said, the Joint Force Headquarters are tied to the DoD, and they're on, the DoD network. It's not complex there. The complexity of this, making sure that the interagency information sharing piece is unique with the states at the local level, working with those organizations, but making sure that the outcomes, if you are not complying with the DoD standards, we can't let you on the network, because we can't put the risk to the DoD based on an outcome that you may get the outcome, but then you just put the whole DoD at risk. So there's mitigating capabilities that we have out there at the local state level that tie in to make sure that we're in compliance. And the other thing that I would like to note, we have, it's not like we at this alone. With the states, we have almost 4,000 airmen and soldiers that are in the cybersecurity mission force, and they work with Cyber Command every day. So we have a unique way of being tied in from a state level, but also the capability to work at the DoD level with cybersecurity.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. Let me move to Jonathan Fibus from Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Jonathan, very similar to maybe some of the DoD folks, but also a little different. Talk a little bit about your approach to cybersecurity, again, compliance versus outcomes.
So we're hoping that by focusing on outcomes will lead to compliance. There was a time when we were focused on just developing documentation or paperwork, as most folks called it. And having a paper security program was not helpful to anyone. It led to a lot of outcomes that we didn't want to have. So by focusing on the tools and the data that we had, by focusing on the control points that FISMA gave us, and by focusing on modifying our process to make sure that we were improving our outcomes, we've improved both the compliance and the outcomes that we derive from our security program. We're here to amplify the mission to make sure that what the NRC does, which is protecting public health and securing, regulating the use of civilian nuclear materials, both in power plants and in diagnostics and scientific arenas, that we are going to be providing value to that mission. So we're going to be helping the people who are out there inspecting a plant, inspecting a different type of licensee, a materials licensee, to make sure that the data that they're getting, their proprietary data from the licensee, is being appropriately protected while we are the steward of it, that it's leading to good decisions from a licensing and regulatory perspective, and that it's leading to a good outcome from a security perspective. So we've seen improvements in the way that our IG and the way that DHS is rating our program on an ongoing basis. And we think it's because we've been focusing on the outcomes as the cornerstone of our compliance mission.
And when it comes down to outcomes, again, it goes back to, I think, something that Linus was saying from DLA. Is that because you guys have taken a different approach to working with the mission areas, or is there something else that changed from your perspective in the CIO's office to approach cyber differently, like Stephen Hernandez says, which is he credited FISMA, which very few people ever credit FISMA for much.
I would credit the fact that we started talking to the business differently. As we started moving some things to the cloud and we tried to figure out what the good applications to move to the cloud were, we got a very different understanding of what their information processing needs were and what their information security requirements could be. That was one definite push to get us to move more towards outcomes. The other thing was CDM. I'm sure we've heard more people credit CDM for improving cybersecurity than we have FISMA. But CDM actually gave us tools and platforms that were providing us a consistent view of data. And as we started moving from our in-house data center to our cloud to shared services, we started getting a whole lot of different inputs to our data. And we had to start asking questions. Is this really where this data should be? Are the right people having access to it? And as Steve mentioned before, when we look at least privilege or account management and access management control families in FISMA, we started asking the question differently. Should this person be accessing this data? How should they be accessing this data? And what should we do to control and monitor the privileges that they have? And as we started asking those questions, working with the business to figure out the sensitivity of that data, we started getting a whole lot of different outcomes, and we started paying attention differently to our data.
All right, very good. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we can continue this conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Cybersecurity, Ensuring Successful Security Outcomes, sponsored by Optiv and Checkpoint on Federal News Network.